It's time for The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour with us. Time Magazine's Vivian Walt, how are you?
Very good.
All right, also with us, Anne-Elisabeth Boutet of the Sunday Telegraph. We have with us Craig Kapitas, of course, in The Atlantic, and Anne Baghamery of the International Herald Tribune. The World This Week, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag TWTW. Now, Susan Rice will not be the next U.S. Secretary of State. Barack Obama's UN ambassador, writing in the Washington Post, even before I was nominated for any new position, a steady drip of manufactured charges painted a wholly false picture of me. End quote. Back in September, after the UN ambassador to Libya was killed by Salafists in Benghazi, it was Rice, not Hillary Clinton, who was dispatched to do the full round of Sunday morning political talk shows. She paid dearly for it with this statement.
What happened in Benghazi was, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo.
And Anne Baghamery, the Republicans never let up after that.
No, they never did. They thought they'd found a wedge issue among all the other wedge issues. They, you can argue about whether Susan Rice got a bad deal, and I would argue that she did, but she was put in a terrible position, being shoved in front of those cameras and been given nothing but the State Department talking points. You mentioned Hillary Clinton. Why wasn't the Secretary of State out there answering questions about what went wrong in Benghazi? That's what you really have to ask yourself. Susan Rice probably at that moment knew her goose was cooked and just had to sort of hang in there, wait for the election. And then I'm sure she probably would have made a great Secretary of State. She probably wanted the job, but she saw the way it was coming. And this is the one issue that the Republicans have been able to hang on to and push even after the election.
Three people who have questions to answer about this. David Petraeus, he's gone because of a sex scandal. Hillary Clinton, who's leaving, but will be speaking on Capitol Hill next week.
Yeah, she's going to talk, so they say, but there's been some reports that she might now back out, so we're kind of being held in mystery.
She won't
here.
testify?
I saw a report today that hinted at that she might not do that. But on this Susan Rice thing, I think this is making a mountain out of a molehill. Susan Rice is not one of the greats. You would not mention Susan Rice as you would in the same name, in the same breath as you would, Charles Bolin, Averell Harriman, even James Baker or Hillary Clinton. Great secretaries of state are masterful at avoiding problems, not stepping right into them, as she did with this kerfuffle on the television Sunday news talk shows in the United States.
I have to disagree with you there. I think that Hillary Clinton, when she became Secretary of State, was not immediately a great Secretary of State. I think she learned her job and she did it very well. But I don't think you can say that Susan Rice, simply because she's not Hillary Clinton now, couldn't have become Hillary Clinton.
She's not only not Hillary Clinton. I mean, she's also not Charles Bolin. She's not an Averell Harriman. She does not. There was a group of people, as you well know, in the old days known as the wise men, and now with one wise woman. And they all had one thing in common. They had great intelligence, great smarts, and they were classy. And they knew when to keep their mouth shut, and they knew when to open their mouth. In your newspaper today, the New York Times, I read a story that was saying that that said that Susan Rice's critics said that she didn't know when to keep her mouth shut, that she was outraging people and other diplomats consistently at the United Nations.
Vivian Wall?
I think I have to agree with Craig. I mean, there is a difference here between Susan Rice and Hillary. Hillary had never had a diplomatic job. Susan Rice has been, the voice of the United States at the UN for the past 4 years, and before that, back in the old days, she was deputy Secretary of State.
In charge of Africa.
For Africa. Now, I would say when the confirmation hearings happened, which will not happen now, a lot of her problems actually did not have to do with Benghazi. They had to do with Rwanda. They had to do with a lot of what happened during those years in which she had the Africa portfolio.
Let's look at that right now. Susan Rice, over the past weeks, had not changed her style at the UN. Last week, when French Ambassador Gérard Haraud tried to get Rice to name and shame Rwanda's president as an active backer of Congo's M23 rebels. She told her French counterpart, "Listen, Gérard, this is the DRC. If it weren't the M23 doing this, it would be some other group." That exchange reported in Foreign Policy magazine. The New York Times reporting how Paul Kagame's government in Rwanda was her client when she worked at Intellibridge, a strategic analysis firm in Washington. And it was a very unflattering portrait of Susan Rice that the Times painted at the start of the week through the pen of Helen Cooper, in which it talked about how she tended to micromanage back in the day when she was in charge of African affairs.
Okay, well, you're also bringing up a context in which this nomination takes place, a hypercritical Washington where half the people in it just lost big time in the elections.
That's showbiz. That's normal. I mean, if you can't take the heat, don't try. But, it's. I think she's a mediocre personality, and I think they tried to make her a martyr, but I'm really sorry. You're quite right about Rwanda, and I think that's a much bigger thing in some ways. But the other thing about Benghazi is somebody with a bit of nous would have thought twice without thinking of, how do you get those spontaneous reactions on some movie that nobody has seen because there has been something in Cairo. If she didn't have it, she doesn't have the nose. If she didn't have the nose to smell that there was something not right with the story, she would not have agreed to be the full person to go and parade on morning shows. So I think well shot of her. I mean, talk about former secretaries of state. Condoleezza Rice would not have made that mistake. The other Rice,
they're like peas in a pod, the two of them. They're both lightweights.
No, I disagree. Condoleezza Rice is somebody who had a grounding on a different area, which was the Cold War and Russia, but entirely different animal from this one.
She certainly was accurate when she told the world that Saddam had all those weapons of mass destruction, et cetera, et cetera. They're both lightweights. It
was Colin Powell who said that Saddam had those
well,
weapons of mass destruction. That was your
she
predecessor.
said she echoed that quite loudly.
It does seem to me that at this moment in time, there seems to be so many fires breaking out in so many disconnected places that you're going to have somebody in this job who is just immensely agile. Yes. And you've had it for the last 4 years. I mean, whoever takes over from Hillary Clinton is going to have big shoes to fill, that's clear. And I must say, I covered the UN at a time when Susan Rice had the African portfolio. I happened to be a reporter in New York covering the UN. And I was somewhat surprised when she rose to become ambassador at the UN, because she never impressed me that much back then as being somebody who was, extremely impressive. So.
She's a Chicago loyalist. She's like an alderman, loyal to the mayor. That's what it's all about.
Okay, I say you
guys
go ahead.
It's the Chicago system anyway.
Well, go ahead and
We're
pile on.
hypercritical.
Pile on, but Obama did not say when he reluctantly accepted her demission from this post that she hasn't got. He didn't. He said specifically, and we reported this, that she has an immense capacity to contribute in the government. So watch for her to pop up somewhere else. I think you're still.
She might be the new national security advisor.
She could be the national security advisor. You don't know where she's going to end up. I don't think this highly charged, politicized, very unfair series of events around her nomination to be Secretary of State is going to be determinant of her career and her contribution.
Oh, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Part of it, speaks to diplomatic skills, and that's another interesting point. Rice, by the way, had another go at the French this week. When the Prime Minister of the former French colony of Mali went on state television at 4 a.m. to announce his resignation, not primetime viewing, it was because he spent the previous hours in army custody. Paris's answer, well, speed up training of a Malian army that seems more interested in politics than taking on Islamist rebels in the north of the country. Rice's answer to Paris's answer was, well, Paris's the French plan for Mali intervention is, quote, crap. Foreign policy, though, in the blog there penned by Colm Lynch, saying, despite these concerns and Rice's frank remarks, the United States supports military action in Mali to confront Islamist militants, just not yet. What they're saying is that it's time first to get everyone on the same page, especially with the Algerians, who haven't really been brought on board completely. Next week, French President is going there. You were at a conference this week in Morocco, Vivian Walt, where you were hoping to see the outgoing Secretary of State.
Yes, in fact, she was a no-show. Unfortunately, terrible stomach problems, and who can blame her given the travel schedule and what she has on her head? I get stomach problems just thinking about it. But I did actually interview the Deputy Foreign Minister of Morocco about Mali, another country in Mali's backyard. And basically, there is so little appetite in the region for going to war against those who are in possession of northern Mali, even though everybody is freaked out that they're there and needs to push them out, and everybody agrees that they should get out. Nobody can quite figure out who's going to do it or how they're going to do it. And I think that's a really big problem. And certainly the Algerians don't seem to want to have anything to do with it.
All right, one final point on Susan Rice. Obama still needs to find a replacement, of course. One name that's already been bandied about is the man who once told the Democratic National Convention that he was reporting for duty in his failed 2004 run for president against George W. Bush. We're talking about John Kerry, the senator from Massachusetts. John Kerry, all those descriptions, Craig Kapitas, you were making of what makes a great statesman, does he fit the bill?
No. The last thing we need as a statesman is an East Coast patrician.
Like Charles Bolin or Averell Harriman.
That was another. Charles Bolin and Averell Harriman
Just ask him.
They were of another. They were not of another era, Anne. They were of an era when that type of wisdom was the conventional wisdom, and they were respected globally. Hillary Clinton is by no means a patrician of that ilk. She brought her own style and leadership to the State Department, and I think she gave America a lot of respect around the world. I do not see any of the present candidates fitting that great bill of former American secretaries of state. I just don't see it. You know, you're talking about there's atrophy in Africa. No one cares about Mali. You know, the world's gotten lazy. Terror and complacence are winning. The one thing that Hillary Clinton did is that she had like the woman or not, a lot of the Republicans in Washington, you know, like her. She's well liked on both sides. She made people listen. She made people sit up and take notice. And I'm sorry, but neither Susan Rice or John Kerry have that capability.
All right. We'll look now, though, at a time for whoever the next U.S. Secretary of State will be, a part of the world that's tipped to occupy a lot more of his or her attention.
12월 10일 평안북도 철산군 서해 위성 발사장에서
Dateline Pyongyang, North Korea, the jubilant announcement on the evening newscast of the sending into orbit of a satellite, this in defiance of international warnings. Wednesday's rocket launch just 8 months after a similar attempt ended in an embarrassing public failure. But for many in the Far East, the bold moves by North Korea's young leader, Kim Jong-un, could ultimately seem like a sideshow. At the Gwangju military base in China, the new leader Xi Jinping ordered the People's Liberation Army to enhance its, quote, real combat awareness. China has 2.3 uniformed personnel, the Red Army, the largest in the world. Thursday, the dispute over islands in the East China Sea went into uncharted territory, literally, when Japan scrambled fighter jets after a Chinese government plane flew into what Tokyo considers its airspace. Anne-Elisabeth Moutier, before we went on air, we were commenting how the U.S. talks about how it's interested in Asia. This should start to get its attention, no?
It should have gotten their attention a long time ago.
Maybe it already has.
It's so nice to know that things happen behind the scenes. I sort of feel that there's a kind of vacuum of leadership and an impression on this. I mean, it's a serious problem, and it's mostly a problem of Chinese doing, because China has got all sorts of various problems, but the hugest one is that it's a blocked system with a party where nobody wants to take responsibility for anything. But when you start acting belligerent, you can sort of defer looking at other things, from corruption to the economic growth stalling to all sorts of things, and that works very well. It is a major problem, considering that China holds most of American debt. I should imagine that America should really be concerned also with whatever can take China's attention in different and dangerous ways, and it's something worrisome because Japan is really an ally.
And by the way, it's not just those islands in the East China Sea. Last week, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman said Vietnam had expelled Chinese fishing vessels from waters near China's southern Hainan province, in waters that both sides claim. There you see the islands that are disputed with Japan. Hanoi's version of events was that a Vietnamese oil exploration ship had a seismic cable cut by 2 Chinese fishing ships. Beijing says you can't look for oil there. It's not every day, by the way, you see demonstrations in Vietnam, where police broke up anti-China protests in 2 cities last weekend. And it's not just the Vietnamese who are worried. The Philippines' foreign minister advocating a rearmament of Japan as a result. We would welcome that very much, Albert de Rosario told the Financial Times in an interview. We're looking for balancing factors in the region, and Japan could be a significant balancing factor. Craig Kapitas.
You know, the world has changed inexorably when a Filipino politician is asking Japan to rearm. It's a staggering statement. I honestly don't know what else to say about that. When I read that, I was just completely gobsmacked. The idea of the Japanese rearming. Can you imagine the Chinese reaction to that? Can you imagine the reaction throughout the region?
You know, that could happen because the Japanese have elections, general elections, I believe it's on Sunday.
Right.
And the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, which was in power for many years, is now in opposition. Their big platform plank, and which the one that has gained resonance with the voters, is a stronger defense, a stronger military for Japan.
But do they
that
have
is
the money?
actually a selling point for them. And people are speculating that it could be the thing that puts them over the edge, that puts them back in power.
And a country can always find the money to rearm, right?
All right, it's a final take on this from Singapore-based Filipino cartoonist Deng Khoi Miel with his own take on China's new leader Xi Jinping. We can show it to you there. When we come back with the world this week, we're going to be looking at a politician who's not new, but perhaps making a comeback. Stay with us.